We've been talking about forgiveness in the context of what I call the age of rage, which is what Paul predicted in 2 Timothy. And so we've been outlining the different manifestations of that, but ultimately what he's really talking about is that there was coming a point where people would live internally referencing. And by that I mean I would determine what is true and what is right by what I feel. And so there is no arbiter of truth other than how strongly do I feel it. So if I'm offended by anything you say to me, my offense carries the weight of truth. Whether contextually that's accurate or not. And so he is predicting that we'll live in this internal place where we reference ourselves. You see it now pretty much in every corner. You see it in our politics. You're seeing it on school campuses. You're seeing it in music. Where I've never seen a scene where, or a season where hours from dropping my diss track, I can come back at you. That's what rage am I sitting on that I can come back at you within hours. It used to be the production of a song. I got to get in the studio. I had to produce it. Now I have so much rage, I can respond in almost real time, like we're having a discussion. Yet no one can respond in real time in problem solving. No one's bringing that real time to problem solving. So consider this. We get into this beef and one of us is smart enough to recognize, you know what, I'm sorry. I'm out. I'm just done. So one of us is smart enough to do that, and the public comes for their neck because you soft. Because you soft. Yeah, I'm soft. Do I need this smoke? I don't need this smoke. There's no way once you get past, I'll say, 3,500 square feet of living space that you should be that mad at anybody. I mean, once you get past 3,500 square feet of living space, you should have created a zone of peace. That's big enough to kind of be like, you know what? I'm good. I'm tending to my garden at that point. I couldn't be hard once I got past 3,500 square feet. I might even drop a harp up in there. Yeah. But as funny as it is, not only is there smoke, But man, are we here for it. Think about how many of you knew exactly what I was talking about, and I didn't say what I was talking about. Can you think of one problem that got solved this week? Can you think of one good thing that happened this week that drew you in? Some loving act that is like the focus. We're here for the smoke. Even when we come to celebrate, we talk about the smoke stories. So we coming together to celebrate, and while we're coming together to celebrate, did you hear? Have you seen? I say that because that's a mindset. And that's what Paul is talking about. We will live predisposed for smoke. His answer to that, or his counter to the age of rage, is found in chapter 4. And I began to dissect that last week, where he talks about, I charge you, in verse 1, in the presence of God and Christ Jesus, who is to judge the living and the dead by his appearing and his kingdom. So I talked about last week that one of the things we have to do to get out of this sense of rage and smoke and all this and being hard is to recognize that everything that we're doing is being witnessed by God. And that ultimately God is not just the witness, he is present. And we are accountable to him, not the situation. So last week I talked about the need to see past the situation. And Paul in his charge starts with, the first charge is that you live out your life as though God is present for every moment of it. That literally Jesus is watching. And he's taking record and note of everything that you're doing. It's one thing if you're like Eddie Haskell. Yeah, I know. None of you know who. Look up Leave It to Beaver. But Eddie Haskell was Beaver's friend, brother's friend. And he would be very appropriate in front of the parents. And then the moment they walked out of the room, he would be who he was in the raw, which is not a good friend, not a person you want to hang around with. But as long as parents or adults were around, he could shine. We really handle God like he's only present for Sunday. And literally the hours that we're in church. I'm not even talking about parking lot, lobby, walking up, riding here. We don't handle it like God is watching. And so last week I talked about part of that mind shift is that you've got to remember that God is omnipresent, that he is all-knowing, essentially that he's God. And so the first part of that charge is that you live with the reality of God's existence as God, not as the homie, but as God. In other words, he's saying that the first part of the charge is to recognize the sobriety of the reality that God ain't playing. and to take life serious because God is present. And we will give an account for all of it. The appearing of Jesus and his kingdom. Verse 2, he moves into the next part of the charge, which is what I really want to talk about this morning, and he starts to get into the heart of the charge. And in verse 2, which is probably all I'll cover today, he instructs him, and I'll just read it, preach the word, be ready in season and out of season, reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience and teaching. So let's start the process of breaking that down. The first thing you need to put into your thinking is Timothy didn't hear what you just heard. When he says preach the word, he would not have heard what you would hear in terms of preaching the word, because when you hear preach the word, you think preacher, you think sermon, you think pulpit, you think church. It really was no church. Does everybody understand that? There wouldn't have been like, oh, so every Sunday when I get up, I need to stand. I need to deliver that word. I need to bring that heat. I need to be bringing that. That's not what Timothy wouldn't have heard none of that. One of the other things you'll think possibly when you hear that is that he is talking about a level of scholarship. That like, oh yes, preach the word, need the education, need to have it down. Timothy probably wouldn't have heard that either. Because he's probably not going to university, not going to a seminary. Yeah. He's doing relationship. So he would have heard this through oral tradition. And in hearing it through oral tradition, he wouldn't have had Genesis to Revelation. Does everybody understand that? So he wouldn't have been preaching Genesis to Revelation. The word he would have been charged would have been the word that had been deposited in him by the Apostle Paul. Does everybody understand that? And that word would have been gospel-centric. Now, why is that significant? It would have been gospel-centric because it was countering what would have been law-centric. Does everybody understand? So you're coming from a culture that has religious ritual that drives it, and Paul is telling him, you will have to preach this word with the fidelity, really, to the gospel. All right. Does everybody understand that? And so he would have heard to preach the word wouldn't have been like we would think. Ooh, man, from Genesis to Revelation, he just went through that whole thing. The center of that word would have always come back to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The extent to which the Old Testament mattered is it foretold the coming of Jesus. And if you get locked into any place in the Old Testament where you don't see it as the foretelling or the need for the coming of the Messiah, the anticipation of Jesus, if you're reading of the Old Testament and you're doing it comprehensive, if it doesn't bring you to Jesus, you're not in the Word. Does everybody understand that? Because part of that Jewish dynamic or Judaism was it got into laws, it got into rituals, it got into behaviors, it got into things that you had to do, sacrifices, and all of these patterns of behavior that were measurements of your spirituality and whether God accepted you or not. It had a lot of mediator between God and you. There were veils and there were things you had to do, and there were patterns and habits and celebrations and festivals and all these things you had to do to be close to God. And what he's instructing him to do when he is instructing him to preach the word, he's getting him to focus on the good news. That's the context of the word in which he would have heard it. He wouldn't have heard it topically. He wouldn't have been like, oh yeah, I need to be able to preach the word topic by topic. He wouldn't have heard it topically. What he would have heard, watch this, comprehensively is, you need to know that he came sent by God, that he walked among us, that he taught, that he was crucified, and that he was buried, and that he was raised from the dead, and that he now sits at the right hand of the Father making intercession for you. If you'll come to the light. That would have been the context in which he had heard it, and it would have been that he was calling him to exercise his commitment and his fidelity to it. Here's the other thing he would have heard. He would have heard not to preach on the DL because the word preach means to make it public. It means to herald publicly. Don't forget, this was oral, not read tradition. So this gospel that he preaches is something he would have verbally been charged to share with people. Watch this. It wouldn't have been his private faith. Like, this is my thing. Yeah, it would have been oral, it would have been public, and it would have been heralded, so that the foundation of what he was charging him to do was to talk it out as you walked it out, and to not back down from it and not to be afraid of it. The other thing he would have heard is the cost. Because he's saying in season and out of season, and it was out of season at the time that he gave him this charge, because it was the time when the church was being persecuted, so much so, we don't have many chapters from Paul after the 4th chapter. Does everybody understand that? Paul is essentially writing the last thing he'll write because of that persecution. He will be put to death. And he would have heard the cost. Now, one of the things that we need to come to terms with is there is a cost to live right. There's a cost to live right. And your cost to live right is part of telling the story of the gospel. You cannot preach the gospel and not live and practice forgiveness. You have to practice forgiveness, or the gospel that you're preaching, you have no fidelity to it. Because it is the good news about redemption. Consider this. I talked a few weeks ago about how we do the 7 last sayings of Jesus Christ. If you look at all 7 of them, all of them are about re-engagement. What do I mean by that? It's about keeping things from having a permanent breach. I talked about mother, behold your son, son, behold your mother, re-engagement of relationship. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Re-engagement of relationship. If you go through every act from the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. What you will see is he is from the cross setting relationships in alignment and in order with redemption and the gospel and the good news. Everything that he was doing was a move to put something in order and to keep it from being lost, to keep it from being permanently exiled from God. Everything that he was doing was generating an opportunity for people to experience redemption. So he was living out literally all that he had taught to that point. And everything that he did from that cross was to reestablish relationship and reframe relationship in a context of connection and not alienation. That's how your life should look. You shouldn't be bragging about how many people you've alienated. That shouldn't be like, you know me. That shouldn't be you. And then in the next moment, you're singing how much you love Jesus. You can't love him and be that comfortable. I'll cut you off and have that spirit. So when he tells him to preach the word, Timothy would have heard that in a different context. He would have heard the cause. Watch this. And it would have had a unique construct to it because he would not have preached a word that he simply read and believed. Because it wasn't like that. It wasn't this yet. We ain't even gotten to the printing press yet. So what he really would have to trust is what through relationship had been passed on to him. Need you to hear this. It would have been something communicated through Paul and his relationship and his walk with him. He was calling him to be faithful to what he had not read, but experienced. Watch this. And experienced through walking with Paul, watch this, which is why Paul, right after this, cites his testimony. You've seen my walk. You've seen the things that I've lived through. I haven't just preached this word. You've seen it cost me. You've seen it test me. You've seen it change me. You've seen it transform me. He wouldn't have just heard, oh, study the word and then preach the word. What he would have heard was, preach the word you've seen me live. One of the reasons why I believe that we don't have the faithfulness that we need to have is because we don't really want a Christianity where we get discipled. When we say we want counsel, we want comfort without authority. We want somebody to kind of, oh, you're going to be fine. We don't want nobody telling us, you may have to ride through these consequences for a season because you done jacked some stuff up. Now, my counsel to you is stop jacking some stuff up. Let the consequences kind of run their course, and then you can hit the reset button. But there's no peace today Because there's too much mess still in your mind and in your heart and in your pattern and in your behavior. So, yeah, it ain't going to be all good. So in preaching this word, he wouldn't have just heard, study it, and share it. He would have heard, you've seen me live it. Now it's your turn to live what you've seen me live. Somehow we think, oh, I need to get in the word deeper. Because we mistakenly believe that belief creates connection. When connection creates belief, because connection exposes consistency in character. And once you see the consistency in character, you become credible. And once you are credible, I can credit you with trust and investment. But if you're not credible, if you're not consistent, if you're not living it, it's why we struggle with belief, because we believe, but we don't live it and we don't see it being lived. And we don't want to get close enough to somebody who's trying to live it. Because the only reason why we want to be close is so that we can do better. Not that we can do relationship. So he wouldn't have heard preach the word like we hear preach the word. That's my point. And then he tells them in season and out of season, which is the second charge. Watch this. As important as it is to preach the word, you cannot preach the word from a position of comfort and convenience. The preaching of the word that he is calling him to do involves, watch this, living the gospel, sharing the gospel in spite of the situation and circumstances, when it's convenient and when it's not convenient. One of the greatest challenges people face is loving when the person is unlovable. Everybody's prepared to love the lovable. Here's how people get married. They get married to the lovable. Oh, you're so lovable. Oh, you're so cute. And so I marry you out of the lovable. And then we're together for a while. And some of that shine. I want to see you high and lifted up and the glory shining. Yeah, well, I married you and I want to see you high and lifted up and the glory ain't shining on you like it did when we were dating. So I don't see you high and lifted up shining in the glory. That challenge to do it in season and out of season. The significance of this whole passage is that Paul has established, by letting Timothy spend time with him, a level of credibility that reinforces the trusting in the gospel. That person at work that you've been praying for, that you've been working on, that you've been sliding scripture, that you think life is a hot mess. My question to you is, how messy have you gotten in your walk with them? Because I'm here to tell you, if you're not willing to get messy with them, then all that stuff you're doing, it's a scriptural drive-by. That's all it is. It's a scriptural drive-by. You drive by, you see him on the porch, pop, 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 and you speed off. And you don't deal with them. You don't walk with them. You don't let them see how you came from mess, because you want to maintain the spiritual superiority that you've achieved in their eyes. And you'd rather have them see you lifted up than really get in their life and help them lift up their bowed down head. That's what he would have heard in terms of preaching. The worst counsel I got was when somebody told me, part of the problem with your ministry is you let people get too close to you. I'm going to just be honest. I almost cuss in my head every time I think about that advice. I told you it's my native language, and whenever you trigger me, I go back to my native language, and then I have to reinterpret before I say it. So like my French, I can't let you hear my French, so I hear the French in my head, and then before I say it out. But understand, the point was valid. There's a cost to doing it that way. People will judge you. People will draw conclusions. People will come for you. They'll see enough to elevate themselves and demote you. And you got to be prepared for it. In season and out of season. You got to be prepared to live in it with them. So he wouldn't have just heard preach the word like a grenade and lob it. He would have heard preach the word in his hand to hand. It's me being in the mess with you. It's me in the trenches with you. That's how he would have heard it. He would have heard it in a much more comprehensive, much more nuanced. Watch this. He would have heard that there are nuances within the culture that you need to understand and be relevant, but you also need to sustain some transformative principles that go beyond the culture. So it isn't just that you're relatable. You've got to have something that is relatable to establish the connection and the relevance. But then for where God wants to take their life, we got to move into the transformative and the transcendent. So you've got to be able to handle the good news in a way that doesn't stop and end at the edge of their problem. You've got to have a word that goes beyond the edge of their problem into a space that is bigger than the little life you live in. And that God is calling you to walk out something that's comprehensive that has been handed from generation to generation. God's not starting new with the Bible every time a Christian comes to the Lord. It's not a refresh. It's being handed in the same way the Olympic torch never goes out, because it's transferred from one fire to the next fire. The fire doesn't go out. It's not new fire. And that's how the gospel is to be presented. Watch this. You can't preach the gospel, set somebody else on fire, if you haven't run for a season with your own fire. And the problem is, we got too many Olympians running with a torch that ain't got a flame. And then they're getting next to people and they're like, how come you ain't on fire for the Lord? How come you ain't living right? How about you bring some heat? How about you bring some warmth? How about you bring some flame? So it tells them, preach the word, be instant, in season and out of season. Here's what it means. I got to trust it past how big your problem is. I can't be intimidated by the fact that you have a tragedy I can't even, like I got no answer for that. God has an answer for all of it. And I'm not intimidated by how caught up you are or how bad it is or how tragic it is. I'm going to share that same gospel. I know you don't want to, I don't want to hear scripture. I know. Yeah, well, here we are. Here we are. Because I can't do nothing for you, man. All I got is the gospel. It's the only thing that's worked for me. Why would I try to invent something that is unique to your situation, hoping that that'll work? I'm going to make something up. No, I'm going to just go with what worked for me, and I'm going to believe that it is transcendent in the way that it'll work for you. Now, you're going to have to apply it. You're going to have to walk it out. And you're going to have to mess it up just like I did. And it's going to take time, and it's going to take a process, just like I did. And you're going to have to walk with somebody just like I did. That's what he would have heard. In season, out of season. Now, part of that context he talks about in the next part is in the presentation of that word or the execution of the walk of that ministry. He talks about three specific dynamics of the way that manifests. So that foundationally that word is rooted in three sort of, what's the term I'm looking for, avenues of expression. The first one is correction. Now, correction addresses the cognitive, your thoughts, your beliefs. So when he says preach the word, a part of preaching the word is to preach a word of correction. What do I mean by that? It's to address distortion. So part of when I share God's word with people is I'll listen to their take and I hear the distortion. And so a part of it is I have to be skilled enough in the word to address their distortion. That's correct. I need to be able to hear it and be like, wow, okay. Okay, so let's go back over that. So here's what you're saying when you say that. I'll give you an example. It's when I sit and I listen to somebody share about their spouse. And when they're done sharing about their spouse and they've loaded all kind of intent into it. Like, and then they did, and then, and I know they were thinking this, and I know they were, and so when they're done, part of my correction is to say, wow, that's a lot. You know what I would conclude if I heard that? That they're evil. Because that's really what you just described. You described somebody who is lying in bed at night. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. When I get up, wait till you get up. I planned this overnight. I'm late specifically to target you. I intentionally left late. So, because I knew it would bother you. I'm in the lab thinking of stuff that I could do to just make you mad and to throw your whole day off. That would be evil. But that's how we think. We take it personal. When you take it personal, that's distorted thinking. Here's what I guarantee you. Your spouse is so damaged and so struggling. Honestly, they don't have time to be evil. Because everybody knows that anybody who is evil has to have a lair. They have to have a lair that no one has access to. And that lair has a lab where they can work stuff out. You are far too intrusive in their life for them to have an evil lair. Because the moment you don't see them, you're texting them or you're calling them or you're walking into a room coming in, what you thinking? What you doing? They wouldn't even have time to set up the plan and the lair. Anybody hearing? So we have to correct the thinking, and that's what correction is. Correction is we address inaccurate beliefs, challenge misconceptions, particularly for forgiveness about what is our responsibility in terms of an engagement of one another. When can you cut somebody off? What are the reasons why, nah, we good? What would trigger that? Is it the level of offense? Or might it be tied to my safety? What would trigger that? These are the things in terms of, because you in a mood. I'm sorry, I don't. So part of the correction would be, moods don't count. I'm having a day. Yeah, sorry, we're doing eternity. And days don't matter like that. Does everybody understand that? So it's correcting, and sometimes you have to address their narrative. So correction. So correction would really come under the heading of coaching. That's what it would be. It would be coaching behaviors. Watch this, where I don't come down on you and shame you for not knowing or not having the capacity yet, because we haven't walked together long enough for you to even understand it and get it. Watch this. In the coaching, I do not hold you accountable for the level of this you haven't even experienced. So what would be an example of that? Having the expectations of a 25-year marriage in year one. And you'd be surprised how many people had a 25-year expectation and it's just year one. Yeah, some of that you won't care about. Trust me. Get out past 10 years and about 9 of the things on your 10 list, you're not going to care about. You're not going to care about it. That stuff that you went to war over, it'll be like your third child. They fail, boom. Are you all right? Get up. Stop all that crying. That's what you do with the third one. The first one, oh my God, oh baby, are you okay? Are you okay? You freaking the child out. So I don't have those expectations. That's correction. Now, what is the positive outcome of correction? The positive outcome of correction would be wisdom and understanding. So I coach you to a point where you gain wisdom and understanding. Another term for that, if you're not comfortable with wisdom and understanding, is you gain clarity. And so I now am clear, so I can't be so mad that I cuss her out. Yes. So under no circumstances am I to cuss her out. Yes. Yes, that is exactly what. So you mean that I'm to be angry and sin not, and that cussing is part of the sinning? Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you would be sinning. Okay. All right, I understand that now. Now, I gain an understanding, I gain clarity, and then you back in my office for yet again. So now we're seeing a pattern that brings into the next one, rebuke. So first I address you in terms of the coaching you through it. But there's a point where you should be able to read the blitzing linebacker from the outside. You should be able to walk to the line. We have talked about this. We've gone over the tape. We've gone over the film. There comes a point where I'm not coaching you in it. I'm now challenging you. So our conversation on the sideline is different in year 1 than it is in year 3. So when you walk to the sideline the first time, I'm doing this. That's okay. You know, this is part of the process. You'll pick it up next time. But in year 3, you keep getting blowed up because you failed to read. You didn't see? He creeped right up. We showed you what the tell was. Your center even pointed. He's the hot read. What were you looking at? We're having a different conversation, and I ain't happy at this point. So what is this about? What rebuke is about? It's about addressing behavior, actions, and patterns. Watch this. This now involves setting boundaries. What would be a boundary in this scenario is, I can still coach you, you can't start for us. I'm censoring you. You will be on the bench. Why? Because the first thing addressed my intellect and my understanding, but once you gain intellect, clarity, and understanding, and you continue to operate in the same pattern, do things the same way, well, now I got to address that, and I got to set boundaries. Why am I setting boundaries? I'm setting boundaries to stop the behavior. And what this involves is actual confrontation. So we're having a conversation about, if you do not clean this up, you will not be starting moving forward. And we will bring the other guy in. We will replace you. And if you don't understand that, why? Because rebuke is meant to produce conviction. It's for you to realize, oh, so they serious. So we're very understanding of the mistakes. We're very understanding of the lack of production early. But then we change your coach, and we don't see changes in the output. Rebuke. So we bring 2 more quarterbacks in. Because you ain't getting the job done. You didn't hear what I just said. So we're gonna bring Russell Wilson in. Now, you see that and you witness that, that's a rebuke. That's a form of rebuke. Here's what we're saying. We're setting boundaries on the level of damage you can produce for us because we have put something in place that we can move on without you. The whole show ain't about you. That's rebuke. Now, your character will be exposed when you're rebuked. Because you can take it as a charge and a challenge and clean up your game. Or you can wind up backing somebody else up somewhere else. But what the rebuke says is there's a point of this where the grace runs out and consequences begin. So part of my preaching is to have the grace for the fact that you stumble and you learn. But at a certain part, I have to set boundaries on your actual behavior when you are in a willful pattern and making willful choices. One of the discipleship groups I ran when I was at Faithful Central, we would come in, we would meet. I was co-leading. And every week, the guys would go, oh, man, single guys. I just got to say I failed this week. And by failed, they mean they were having sex with their girlfriend. So I failed in there. I failed. Yeah, I failed. So one week I told them, next week, We need to have a non-gravitational impacted meeting. I'm shutting this down. Why? Because all y'all are coming in here and getting comforted so you could go back out and sin. So that grace I had of walking you through, okay, so what happened, and the skills and the tools and the things that we talked about, you being there past 1 o'clock, watching video from the bed. All that stuff that we talked about that you haven't implemented, not one piece of this. Guess who ain't meeting with you indefinitely to have the fall talk? We need to change the season from fall to spring. That's what I'm talking about. We need to move forward. Does everybody understand that? That's rebuke. Now, it's to be done with the actual authority of the position, which means we have to have a relationship where you allow me in at a level that I can confront some real stuff. And that not be called hate, or shaming, or piling on, or offense, or that. I just don't like the way you came at me. I don't like the way you've been repeating your behavior. That's rebuke. And it's actual confrontation. What's the positive outcome? Positive outcome is conviction. Rebuke is designed to produce conviction. And that conviction is where you become motivated to change your behavior, where you leave out of here saying, I got to stop messing up. I got to stop. So they needed to leave that week. The next week, we dropped about 6 guys from the group. The fallers. Meeting opened up. Who failed this week? Just need to know who failed this week. You're done. We'll do it again. You join in when your season changes from fall. Because we're not going to be wasting our time up in here. That's rebuke. And rebuke addresses the actions, patterns, and behavior. Correction addresses the thoughts and beliefs. Exhortation addresses the attitude and mindset. When I exhort you, I am encouraging you. I am urging you to live a certain way. And that is to keep you focused and moving forward and on track. Now, in that, it involves encouragement through advising and counsel. So at this point, I'm more of a consultant than a coach. Why? Because you've learned and you've gained clarity. You've now moved to a place where you live out of life, out of conviction, where you can correct your own behavior. So at this point, I shouldn't be working hard walking with you. We're doing tune-ups now. We're doing scheduled maintenance now. So you're coming in, we're checking in. Hey, so what's going on? Oh, man, I'm working through this. But most of the working is you. What I'm now helping you with is to be encouraged and to share some of this extra wisdom that I've had from walking this path a little longer than you have. And so that's exhortation, and exhortation is about now I'm counseling you through stuff. So I'm asking questions, I'm probing, I'm seeing where your head is, I'm processing with you. Watch this. I'm not dictating terms at this point. That was the coaching, where there's a specific structure. Rebuke, that was the confrontation. But now I trust that you are living out of a sense of goodwill towards how you want to live your life, and you're committed. So at this point, You are walking in a way where you understand through conviction there's a certain way I have to handle my wife. Now, that's not going to stop you from getting mad. So now I get the call, man, I'm mad. I had to go out. I had to leave the house, man. So I'm calling you just to check in. I know I got to go back. I know I need to calm down, and I know I can't stay mad. So now we're having a different conversation about, yeah, it'd be like that sometimes. yeah, you misunderstand. Yeah, been there, done that. Got a T-shirt, got a hat, got a map, got souvenirs, brought home one of those big Disneyland suckers. Yeah, been there. So now we're sharing experience, and I'm just giving you the counsel and the benefit. Here's what I want you to see. There's a progression.
Right. Yes. Yes.
We go from you not knowing to you needing to be corrected around your patterns. And then finally we end where you are willfully living this thing and you're carrying it, and I'm just coming alongside of you occasionally to walk with you through that. Where are you? I didn't ask you how long you've been walking with the Lord. Where are you in this process? And where do you need to get to be fully engaged in this process? And should you by now, at least after all these years, be past the need for clarity?